Imagine for a moment that you are a factory owner in Bavaria. You have lived your entire life in this part of the world. You have family here, friends here, a legacy built over decades. You think of this place as home, safe, orderly, reliable. But it is winter, and something unnatural is happening. It is the winter of 2025, and the wind has stopped blowing. It has not blown for days, 3 days without a single gust. A strange meteorological phenomenon the Germans have a name for, something heavy, a darkness they call Donnerfluss. In the fields outside your factory, there are wind turbines, massive white giants that once spun so proudly they seemed like creatures of motion themselves, but now they are still and silent and useless. You glance down at the paper on your desk, thick, heavy, uncomfortably dense. It is your energy bill. It lands like a thud. You see the numbers first, then the total, then the unavoidable truth that makes your breath catch. You're not sweating because it is warm. You are sweating because you turned your heating down to save money, and all that did was make your workers shiver and your heart pound. Electricity prices have shot through the roof. The number on the bill reads 30 cents per kilowatt hour, enough to make any industrialist blanch, enough to make you realize that right now you're grinding your margins into dust. Across the border in Linz, just a few hundred kilometers away, another factory hums. The owner over there is paying roughly half of what you're paying. Half. It is the difference between staying in business and moving your machines somewhere else for cheap power, somewhere like America or China, where energy is a commodity and not a curse. The camera of your mind zooms out to a map of Europe. All across this continent, nations scramble like gamblers in a casino with the cards stacked against them. Germany scratches at gas contracts as if they were lottery tickets. France, Belgium, Spain pray for wind. Italy grinds its teeth through pipeline deals. One country, one nation, is sitting almost serenely, quietly and steadily pulling in billions of euros just by selling excess power to frantic, desperate neighbors. That nation is France. France is not merely surviving this energy crisis. France is winning it. But to understand how France pulled this off, and why the rest of Europe is suddenly realizing it bet on the wrong horse, we must begin at the beginning. We must hear how a 50-year-old gamble that once seemed reckless, even mad, became the cornerstone of European survival. Let us cut through the noise and look at hard numbers, because the scoreboard of 2025 does not lie. For years, the narrative was identical in every major capital and every newspaper editorial. France was the sick man of European energy. Its nuclear fleet was aging, its reactors were offline for corrosion repairs, and every journalist with a microphone seemed determined to announce the imminent arrival of blackouts in Paris. Meanwhile, Berlin was heralded as the shining beacon of the renewable future, a paradise of solar and wind, a triumph of green ideology. Life moves fast, and reality moves faster. By the time we arrived in late 2024 and early 2025, the supposed powerhouse of renewable Europe was revealed to be deeply vulnerable to simple things like weather, while France, the aging nuclear nation, had become the ultimate power broker on the European grid. Official data from RTE, the French grid operator, dropped like a bombshell in early 2025. France exported a net total of 89 terawatt-hours of electricity over the course of the year. To put that into human terms, that is enough power to run the entire country of Belgium for a full year. This massive flow of electrons translated into a record-breaking 5 billion euros in revenue. 5 billion earned simply by keeping the lights on, while neighboring countries were losing their minds. You need to imagine the scene in boardrooms across Europe. German executives fidgeting with their renewable strategy presentations, Belgian regulators dialing down import caps, Italian industrialists pulling out their hair as they watch their competitors in Lyon and Bordeaux enjoy stable, low-cost power. And in Paris, French officials lean back, sip coffee, and watch the numbers climb. All of this is happening while Germany, for reasons that future historians will likely label economically suicidal, pushed ahead with the closure of its remaining nuclear reactors, including 3 in 2024 alone. Germany, once the poster child of industrious pragmatism, was now paying for windless nights with coal-fired imports from Poland and Czechia, and occasional gas shipments from Russia that smelled faintly of irony. The stunning irony of the situation boils down to this simple truth. Germany poured hundreds of billions of euros into its energy transition. It plastered its countryside with wind turbines and solar panels. And yet, whenever the weather did not cooperate, who did Germany call? Who did it depend on for stable energy when its own system creaked at the edges? It called EDF, Électricité de France, the giant state-owned monopoly that had quietly become the backbone of European power. In the back half of 2024 alone, France exported 8 terawatt-hours of electricity to Germany. The most advanced economy in Europe, renowned for its engineering, its precision, its industrial might, ran large parts of its grid on French nuclear output. It was ironic in a way that was almost cruel. It was Germany's most ambitious electric future, being powered in large part by the very thing many Germans had spent decades trying to dismantle. And it was not just about reliability, it was about money. French households enjoyed a regulated electricity cap that kept prices relatively stable, around 17 to 20 euro cents per kilowatt hour. German households were staring down rates of 30 to 40 cents. That price gap is not an abstract statistic. It is the difference between an industrial sector that thrives and one that shrinks. It is the difference between factories hiring workers and factories sending jobs overseas. In Germany's industrial heartland, the Rhine Valley, the specter of deindustrialization is no longer a future worry. It is happening in real time. French officials, by contrast, are touring with cameras rolling, courting foreign investment with their secret weapon, stable decarbonized cheap power. Germany's ideological choice has real economic consequences that materialize in jobs lost, factories relocated, and teenagers wondering why their homeland cannot compete with its neighbor. Then there's the climate dimension, the very thing global elites claim to care about above all else. We often hear that nuclear is too slow or too expensive, that it is unsafe or anachronistic. Yet in 2024, France's carbon intensity, the amount of carbon dioxide released for every unit of electricity generated, hovered between 30 and 50 grams per kilowatt hour. Germany's often spiked to 400 or 500 grams whenever wind output sagged and coal plants had to be fired up to compensate. Let that sink in. France was making money, keeping prices lower, and releasing roughly 1/10 the carbon emissions of its main rival. That is not merely a victory, that is checkmate. To understand how France pulled ahead, we must travel back half a century, to a time before the current crisis, before the dramatic headlines, before people even considered renewable energy to be the unquestioned moral choice. We have to go back to 1973, to a world that looks like another planet. The year is 1973, and the Yom Kippur War has just broken out. OPEC nations, furious with Western support for Israel, shut off the oil taps. It was a geopolitical earthquake. For France at that moment, it was nothing short of existential catastrophe. France, in the 1970s, was addicted to oil. Its electricity generation was mostly from burning oil. It had no coal reserves like Germany, no extensive gas fields like the Americans or the Dutch. When the oil stopped, France stopped. Lights went out, factories closed, tanks could not roll. The nation was brought to its knees. Enter Pierre Mesmer, a former colonial administrator, a man seasoned by decades of service, tough-minded and utterly determined. He looked at a nation begging for oil and decided, absolutely, without hesitation, this would never happen again. On March 6, 1974, Mesmer walked onto national television and delivered what would later be called the Mesmer Plan. He told the nation something unforgettable. In France, we do not have oil, but we have ideas. And just like that, the future was rewritten. Mesmer did not propose a timid experiment or a pilot program. He announced a massive, audacious, historically unprecedented shift. France would convert its entire electric grid to nuclear power. Every megawatt of capacity, every future investment would be committed to atomic energy. There would be no debate, no focus groups, no endless environmental impact assessments. The government simply decided and acted. In 21st century terms, it sounds almost absurd. Imagine a nation deciding overnight to rearrange its entire energy infrastructure, effectively betting its economic future on a technology that was still young, costly, and poorly understood. There were skeptics, of course, but Mesmer's resolve quelled most opposition. France broke ground on reactor after reactor, year after year, into the late 70s and through the 80s. They did not build 58 unique power stations. That would have been unwieldy, expensive, and chaotic. Instead, France embraced standardization. They chose a single reactor type, the pressurized water reactor, and built it again and again across the map. Every control room, every pump, every valve, every technician trained for one plant could be deployed to another. Spare parts were interchangeable. Training manuals were uniform. It was an engineering accomplishment of astonishing scale. By the 1990s, France had completed its transformation. The nation no longer stood dependent on imported oil or gas. It had become Europe's energy-independent powerhouse. A nation with baseload capacity so reliable that neighboring grids increasingly interconnected with it, knowing that France could supply steady power day and night. But if that transformation marked the golden age, then the winter of 2022 brought with it the darkest chapter. Everything that had been built over decades, all the pride and certainty was put to the test when a hidden weakness brought the mighty French grid to its knees. It began like so many disasters do, quietly. Engineers performing routine checks at the Civaux plant discovered microscopic cracks in pipes, critical components of the safety injection systems. These were not cosmetic flaws. These were stress corrosion fractures on the very lines meant to flood the reactor core with cooling water in the event of a crisis. In nuclear power, even the suggestion of failure is treated as a fire alarm. One reactor went offline, then another. Investigations revealed the problem was not confined to one site. It was systemic. The defect lay in an entire generation of France's most powerful reactors, the N4 and P4 series. What followed was like watching a heart attack unfold in slow motion. One by one, reactors were shut down for inspection and repair. By the peak of the crisis in late 2022, 32 out of 56 reactors had gone offline. France, once the dependable battery of Europe, now stood on the edge of blackout. For the first time in decades, the grid had to import power. Coal-powered electricity from Germany, solar-fed surges from Spain, anything it could get. The wholesale price of electricity in France skyrocketed to 1,000 euros per megawatt hour. Under normal conditions, the price was 50. The humiliation was complete. Critics swarmed. The German press pounced with headlines celebrating what they saw as vindication for the anti-nuclear movement. Environmentalists called it proof that centralized systems were brittle. Political commentators asked if this was the final blow for France's nuclear ambitions. President Macron faced public pressure unlike anything he had experienced before. Citizens were asked to ration power. Turn off your Wi-Fi routers, they were told. Do not use washing machines between 6 and 9 in the evening. Paris, the city of light, stared down the real prospect of darkness. But here, amid the panic, is where something extraordinary happened. France did not abandon its fleet. It did not pivot to gas or buy into green fantasies that could not be implemented fast enough. Instead, it acted with brutal competence. EDF brought in an elite team of 500 specialized welders. These were not ordinary technicians. These were the Navy SEALs of nuclear maintenance. They worked in high-radiation environments, often guiding robots to perform welds with sub-millimeter precision inside radioactive containment structures. Help came from abroad. Experts from Canada and the United States flew in. Spare parts were flown in from across Europe. It was an industrial war effort. They called it the Grand Carénage, the Great Refit, and it worked. Month after month, reactors came back online. By the winter of 2023, the crisis had stabilized. By mid-2024, France had returned to full power. In fact, it was exporting again faster than any analyst had expected. The corrosion crisis had exposed a vulnerability, but it also revealed a strength, the resilience of engineering culture, the will to act, and the refusal to retreat. The lesson was stark. When a wind turbine stops because the wind dies, there's nothing to be done. When a nuclear plant stops because of a crack, you replace the pipe. One failure is meteorological, the other is mechanical. One is a wish, the other is a fix. At the center of this nuclear renaissance stood one of France's most controversial and long-delayed projects, Flamanville 3. It had become a joke in energy circles, a cautionary tale. Construction began in 2007. It was supposed to be the flagship of European nuclear power, an EPR, the European pressurized reactor, sleek, powerful, safe, efficient. But years passed. Deadlines were missed. The budget exploded from 3 billion euros to over 13 billion. The plant was 12 years late. It was mocked as a white elephant, a symbol of everything wrong with nuclear energy. And yet, in 2024, the unimaginable happened. Fuel was loaded. The atom was split. Flamanville 3 came online. And by the winter of 2025, it was producing over 1,600 megawatts of electricity, enough to power several million homes. It was real. It was working. It had arrived. Unlike sprawling solar farms that require square kilometers of land and deliver peak output only under perfect conditions, Flamanville sits on a modest patch of coastline and produces power around the clock, regardless of clouds or wind. More importantly, Flamanville was a prototype. It was a painful, costly education in how to build again after decades of forgetting. The engineers who completed it now know what to do differently. Supply chains that had withered have been revived. Mistakes that once cost billions have become data points in the next generation of reactor design. That next generation is already here. France is not retreating. It is doubling down. President Macron announced 6 new EPR2 reactors with options for 8 more. These are simplified, modular, and easier to construct. The land is ready. The blueprints exist. The public supports it, with polling showing over 70% approval. While other countries bicker about permits and engage in ideological hand-wringing, France is pouring concrete. And not just for giants like Flamanville. France is now entering the age of the SMR, the small modular reactor. Think of it like building IKEA furniture instead of a cathedral. You fabricate the reactor core in a factory. Robots handle the welding. Quality control is rigorous. Then you ship the modules by truck or barge, assemble them on site in weeks rather than years, and power a mid-sized city or an industrial complex. SMRs represent a new frontier, not just for France, but for all of Europe. Countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, Finland, and Slovakia want nuclear energy, but cannot afford 15 billion euro megaprojects. What they can afford are SMRs. France is ready to sell. It is becoming the apple of atoms, offering not just the hardware, but the service contracts, the training, the safety protocols, the regulatory playbooks. And SMRs solve another pressing issue, industrial heat. Solar and wind can power lights and laptops, but they cannot melt steel or forge glass or process chemicals. SMRs can. You place one next to a chemical plant or steel mill, and the heat flows directly into the factory. That is how you decarbonize the hard sectors, the ones that account for the bulk of global emissions but rarely make headlines. While France was building the iPod of nuclear energy, it also made a bold move on policy. In 2023, the government fully nationalized EDF, ending the illusion that nuclear power could or should operate like a private business chasing quarterly profits. EDF is now 100% state-owned. Critics cried socialism, investors grumbled, but in 2025, the results are clear. France treats energy like a road network. You do not build highways to make dividends. You build highways so people and goods can move. EDF can now offer long-term power contracts at stable prices, around 70 euros per megawatt hour. For a factory deciding where to locate, that stability is everything. In Germany, prices swing with the wind. In France, they are locked in for 15 years. Manufacturers are moving. Reindustrialization is happening. The energy is cheap, clean, and predictable. Meanwhile, France is also playing its final trump card: hydrogen, the fuel of the future. Germany wants green hydrogen, made with solar and wind, imported from Africa via pipelines that do not yet exist. France has a simpler idea. It has nuclear plants running all night while demand drops. Why not use that excess power to produce hydrogen on site? This is pink hydrogen, a term that once triggered political battles in Brussels. Germany tried to exclude it from being labeled clean. France fought back and won. Now the EU recognizes nuclear-derived hydrogen as low carbon. France is already producing it. The infrastructure is in place. Electrolyzers are being installed at nuclear sites. The hydrogen economy is real, and France is already selling into it. With this foundation, France is becoming the nucleus of a new energy alliance within Europe. A bloc of nations, Poland, Hungary, Sweden, the Netherlands, Finland, Czechia, are turning toward Paris, not Berlin. France is exporting not just power, but influence, standards, templates, blueprints, thought leadership. Even beyond Europe, data center giants like Amazon and Microsoft are eyeing France. Their servers need uninterrupted power and ultra-low carbon footprints. France delivers both. A data center in Frankfurt must offset its carbon. In Marseille, it runs clean, and the electricity is reliable. But France's model is not without risks. The country no longer has uranium mines. It imports all of its fuel, largely from Kazakhstan, Niger, Australia, and Canada. That creates dependency. And while uranium is easier to stockpile than gas, it still links France to fragile geopolitics. A coup in Niger recently reminded Paris of that vulnerability. Then there is waste. France reprocesses most of its used fuel at Le Hague, turning spent uranium into new MOX fuel. But high-level radioactive waste still remains. France's solution is a deep geological repository at Bourg, sealed 500 meters underground in clay. It is a massive undertaking. Fierce protests continue. If Bourg fails, France will have to store vitrified waste above ground indefinitely. And finally, there's the cost of decommissioning. All reactors eventually die. Dismantling them is expensive and slow. EDF has set aside funds, but some analysts believe those funds fall short. If the actual costs are higher, French taxpayers could face the bill. These are real risks, but they are risks of engineering, of logistics, of policy. They are not risks of fantasy. They are not hopes pinned to clouds. So why is France winning the energy war? It is not because it is smarter or luckier or richer. It is because it was more stubborn. In a world obsessed with novelty, France clung to what worked. While others chased utopian visions of weather-based grids, France respected physics. It planned for night, for winter, for the absence of wind. It planned for reality. The Mesmer plan was a bet. The corrosion crisis was a test. The SMR rollout is a vision. And Flamanville, for all its cost, may one day be remembered as the tuition France paid to relearn the lost art of energy security. The final question is this. France is sitting in the shade of trees it planted 50 years ago. What trees are we planting now for the people of 2075? Because power is not just measured in volts or euros. It is measured in foresight, in courage, and in the lights that never go out.